When you walk into a room full of strangers and take a look around, you'll instantly have thoughts of who you want to talk to and who you want to avoid. That's the power of first impressions, the instantaneous judgments we make about other people based on the way they look. But are first impressions accurate? Some researchers say no, and in fact, they can be quite dangerous.
Actually, it takes incredibly little amount of time and effort, and this is one of the reasons why first impressions could be quite dangerous to the extent that we think that we know what the person is like. We have done many experiments where you can show a face to a research participant and flash it for less than 1/10 of a second, and that provides sufficient information for people to make up their minds.
That's Alexander Todorov, professor of psychology at Princeton University and author of the book Face Value: The Irresistible Influence of First Impressions. He says first impressions are automatic. You can't not make them.
It is very difficult, in fact, to control the impressions people will form of you. The fact is that we form these impressions quite automatically. We do it effortlessly and we don't think much about it. They just happen. They're a natural part of our perception of others.
Which is exactly why employers should never make snap judgments based on first impressions at a face-to-face interview with a candidate.
There's a lot of good evidence in the past and present evidence in psychology that, in fact, interviews, especially unstructured interviews, are not very good predictors of future performance. So on the side of the employer, the best you can do is actually to do your homework and have a good record of the past performance of the candidate. So the interview should come at the last stage and it should be weighted very little in the final decision. But the psychological fact is that most of the time we overweight the information we get from interviews.
For example, Todorov says a shy person might make a bad first impression, but may be the most qualified and effective candidate for the job. He says first impressions are useful only in the moment and shouldn't become lasting impressions.
The purpose of first impression is really to know others, what others are thinking, what they intend to do right now at the moment. And they could be functionally useful for two reasons. One, they could be useful guides to what is happening right now. So the emotional state of a person, whether they're angry or they're happy or they're in a relaxed mood, is telling you a lot about how we should approach them. But this emotional state is not necessarily a good indication that they're an angry person all the time across time and situations. So this is the first factor. They can provide very useful information for here and now.
But people make snap judgments all of the time about whether a person is competent or trustworthy as a whole just by looking at their face. To prove this point, Todorov conducted studies where he showed test subjects faces of actual politicians in senatorial and gubernatorial races. Todorov was able to predict the outcome in 70% of the races based on the snap judgments of the research participants.
But looking at real voters, it seems that voters who know very little about politics, and particularly those who watch a lot of TV, are those who are influenced by the appearance of the politicians. Highly knowledgeable voters who are really invested, they read regularly the political news, they really want to know what's going on. There's no effect of appearance on them. But people who are not invested in politics yet vote, they're highly influenced by appearance.
For an example of how first impressions can misguide decision-making, look no further than the election of the 29th President of the United States, Warren Harding.
And one of the popular accounts is that he was elected because he looked presidential. And in fact, you can find books from the 1920s, when he was a president, physiognomy books. These books were really, really popular at the time, who describe his presidential greatness, which is kind of written in his chin and this kind of stuff. But, if you look at history, he was actually the worst president ever.
Physiognomy, the pseudoscience of reading character from faces, has a long history dating back to Aristotle. It was extremely popular in the early 19th century, and Todorov sees a resurgence of its popularity today, which has him worried.
For example, in Israel, there's a technology startup which is doing physiognomy. They say, give me an image of a person and I'll tell you whether they're a criminal, pedophile, bingo player, and all kinds of stuff. They have a dozen of odd categories. And we don't know what their technology is because nothing has been published. So this is really, really physiognomy, but under these guys, and they target offices like Homeland Security, private companies, and that I think is dangerous. Another thing is there was a recent paper by two computer scientists in China arguing that they can predict using modern machine learning methods with 90% accuracy whether a person is criminal or not from their image. And there's actually lots of assumptions and biases that go into this analysis, but people think, oh yeah, there's some math, and we put some images of people and we get an outcome, so there's no human bias. But there's many, many human biases.
Even though the science suggests we should ignore first impressions, Todorov says they are used all around the globe.
In the case of impressions of trustworthiness, which is an incredibly important impression, it's probably one of the most important impressions we form of other people, things like emotional expressions, and they could be very subtle. People who kind of look like they're happy or relaxed, they're perceived as more trustworthy. People who look like they're a bit disgruntled or angry, they're perceived as untrustworthy. Femininity, masculinity is also very important. More feminine faces are perceived as more trustworthy, and more masculine faces are perceived as untrustworthy.
In the final analysis, Todorov says there may be a kernel of truth in first impressions. However, if it's a question of making an important decision about someone, Todorov says don't depend on appearances alone. Focus on what's really important and don't get distracted by superficiality. You can learn more about our guest Alexander Todorov and his book Face Value, The Irresistible Influence of First Impressions by visiting our website at viewpointsonline.net. Our show was written and produced by Evan Rook and Polly Hansen. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
May is American Stroke Month, and while not all strokes can be prevented, up to 80%, including recurrent strokes, may be, with a few changes, like not smoking, eating healthfully, being physically active, and maintaining a healthy weight. People who've survived one stroke are at a higher risk of having another, according to Dr. Mitchell Elkind of Columbia University.
About 1 in every 4 stroke survivors will have another one. The best way to reduce your stroke risk is to live a healthy lifestyle and work with your doctor on a prevention plan. Also, ask your doctor if a daily aspirin or other medications for secondary stroke prevention are right for you.
More than 116 million people in the U.S. have high blood pressure, and fewer than half have it under control, putting them at increased stroke risk. Nothing causes more strokes than uncontrolled high blood pressure. Learn more at strokeassociation.org/stroke month.
Heading into summer, McDonald's and its independent franchisees have aspirations to hire roughly 250,000 people, among them workers age 50 and above, through a first-of-its-kind collaboration with AARP and AARP Foundation. McDonald's job postings will be featured on AARP's job board, and the company will work with AARP Foundation on a pilot program to align employer and candidate needs and interests. Melissa Kersey is McDonald's U.S. Chief People Officer.
McDonald's restaurants are where people at every stage of working life can grow and thrive in a flexible environment. With 5 generations now working together, we expect this collaboration will continue to build the diverse and inclusive workforce McDonald's is known for and proud of.
McDonald's Archways to Opportunity program also provides eligible employees with tuition assistance and a variety of education and career advising opportunities. No matter your age, learn more at mcdonalds.com/careers.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook to learn about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on iTunes. Plus, you'll always find podcasts of our segments and information about our guests at viewpointsonline.net. Join us again next week for your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.